Congo is the site of one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. 7 million people displaced, rampant violence, particularly against women and children. It also has an Ebola outbreak. But if you want to understand why this is happening today, you need to understand what happened in the past. And that's the worst, most brutal colonization in the history of the world. Congo was first colonized by the Belgian King Leopold II in the 1860s. And I'm saying the king, not Belgium, because while the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is one of the largest countries in Africa, both by size and by population, 110 million people. Back then, in the 1860s, around 10 million people probably lived in Congo. We're not sure because there was no written or writing system of the 250 different ethnic tribes that reside in Congo. And it wasn't colonized by Belgium at first. It eventually became a Belgian colony. But first, it was colonized by King Leopold, who was a real piece of work, a villain of historic proportions. He colonized the Congo. He lied to the world and said he was doing it to stop the proliferation of slavery. He wanted to outlaw slavery, build schools and hospitals. Instead, he sent a bunch of brutal thugs there to steal ivory. Ivory is from elephant tusks. And at the time, that was how he thought he could extract money. But as time went on, he realized, oh, I can get rubber from this place. And he basically enslaved the entire population into forced labor. He did so because the native tribes in the Congolese region, that's the area where the big Congo River goes through. It's very jungly, and it has a lot of resources. Today, those are rare earth minerals, but back then it was rubber, and eventually mining, even while the Belgians were there. But they didn't have a written writing system. None of these tribes and different linguistic groups did. And so he wanted a paper trail so that to the rest of Europe and the world, he could be like, no, they signed over their land to me. So he got all these different tribes to sign over their land and their labor for all time. For all time. So he was lying to the world, saying that he wanted to abolish slavery, and instead he was stealing all this money to build a bunch of villas in the south of France. He was awful. He hated Belgium. He didn't speak Flemish, which was the language most of his population spoke at the time. He hated his wife and children. His big goal in life was to disinherit his daughters, who he hated. He was so happy when his wife died so that he could marry this 16-year-old prostitute. He truly is awful, but what he did in the Congo is even worse than all that, because what he did in the Congo was enslave all these people in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. He would tie people up, they would work them to death. His force publique, which was like this military armed gang of thugs that was his personal army, he didn't want them to waste bullets as they forced these Congolese people to basically disassemble steamboats and carry them 200 miles through mountains and jungle, because that's why no one had colonized the Congo yet. It wasn't that the rest of the Europeans had good of their heart for the Congo. It was that it was too jungly, infested with different diseases that the Europeans weren't used to, and there were these rapids in the Congo River that you couldn't get past with the steamboat. So he, using forced labor, got people to disassemble these steamboats. And if someone either collapsed or wasn't doing what they were told, they were to be shot. But he didn't want the force publique to waste bullets. And so he would force them to, if a bullet was expended so that they wouldn't waste a bullet, to deliver the severed hands of whoever they had killed. Truly horrible stuff. It inspired the book Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which was a seminal piece of literature at the time, criticizing European colonialism. It was really like, oh, is the Congo unique, or is this just like what is happening everywhere taken to the extreme? And it's the latter. It was probably worse than other colonizations, but all colonizations subjugated the populations, was brutal. Eventually word got out and photographs from missionaries got out about what was happening in the Congo, the scale of the atrocities. And it led to the first international humanitarian rights campaign, basically in history. It was the inspiration, and it laid the foundation for many other different humanitarian rights campaigns, like for the rubber workers in Peru, for other colonies, all kinds of things. And the world forced King Leopold to give up this colony, basically. But if you think he, didn't get his, you're right, because he sold for billions of dollars in today's money Congo to the Belgians, who then turned it into their own colony. And things improved a little, but still not good. And so you need to understand this history to understand why Congo has struggled so much. Because really, when you think about these countries, like Congo eventually got independence in 1960, and when the Belgians left, they had refused to allow any Congolese people to get educated, so nobody could read, write. They weren't prepared to be doctors or lawyers or military officials. And then they just left. They left. There was the Belgians tried to stay, at least a little, but they were the ruling class, and there was a mutiny up against them right after independence. And so then they just left, and they burned everything down as they left. And so Congo was, when these African countries got independence, they weren't left with nothing. In many cases, they were left with less than 100 years of colonization, the most brutal period under King Leopold. There's many books about it that you should read, about his dark heart and his evilness, about what happened to these people. Like they say, between 1 and 10 million people died. That is a scale of atrocity like unfathomable. Like, and so when Congo eventually got independence in 1960, it was from this guy Lumumba. So Lumumba was this Pan-Africanist, like meaning let's all unite and like fight this colonization, that ideology that was rising at the time. And when these African colonies were all getting independence around 1960, 1970s, it was normally led by one charismatic person who became like this, like a founding father of this movement, and that was Lumumba. And Lumumba was not the best administrator, so he really struggled as a leader at first, but nobody was doing him any favors. He didn't even learn how to read and write in a school, because again, Congolese people weren't allowed to go to school. So he learned how to read and write in public libraries. Then he eventually became a civil servant, and then he got in prison for embezzling, and then he had this like come to Jesus moment in prison, and he led this independence movement, and then he became the first premier elected of the Congo. But there was a mutiny in the military. That was because all the officers at the time were still white Belgians. Again, no one had been able to go to school except for the white Belgians, so nobody really understood how to lead these forces. But there was a mutiny among the infantry, which were Congolese people. Then all the Belgians fled the country, leaving them with no one who was like a doctor, a school teacher, a lawyer. They had to rebuild all of this with very little income or help, and the Belgians also burned a lot of like manufacturing facilities and all the infrastructure. And so Lumumba was like, oh my gosh, I need someone's help. He went to the US first. US said no. Then he went to the Soviet Union. And so to the US and the West, that was like, oh, that's the biggest no-no in the world, so we need Lumumba gone. They tried to stage a poisoning attempt of him, that they didn't end up going through with that. Then later, Lumumba fell out of power. He was in prison, and this dictator, Mobutu, took over. He's like the archetype of a kleptocratic evil dictator. Kleptocrat meaning someone who steals from the state's resources and its people in order to enrich themselves. And he was brutal, brutal, brutal. So they had this brutal dictator. Lumumba's in prison. But as that's happening, 10 years later, it's like rising. People are rising, thinking about oh, we miss Lumumba, let's bring Lumumba back. The CIA and the Belgian equivalent get concerned. And so they basically hint, the word is, to Mobutu that this is happening. I don't know, you should do something about it, we're not going to do anything. Mobutu transfers him to a region that hates him, where he is tortured on the plane for hours as he's going to this new prison. Then he's not taken to the prison, he's instead taken out into the woods, shot, then dissolved in acid. The Belgian government only admitted some culpability for this 10 years ago and delivered the last remaining piece to Lumumba's heirs, his tooth, because the rest of him had been dissolved in acid. So we've robbed this nation now, the West, of the independence leader. They've oppressed these people for so long. And after this period, Mobutu leads for a few decades, and then it descends into civil war and violence. It lasts for 20 years, one of the most brutal civil wars, violence. Because you also remember, this is a huge country where no one ethnic group is more than 8% of the population. It has 250 different languages and ethnic groups, basically. Once again, colonies draw these lines, and the concept of being Congolese is new. This country is new. And so then, now, it suffers from international kind of apathy, even though it's so violent, so dangerous, terrible for women, so poor despite all these resources, because the mining resources are basically stolen by outsiders. And right now they're suffering because M13 is this separatist group in the Kivu provinces in the east that's supported by the Rwandan totalitarian leader because he wants those resources. Rwanda is one of the largest exporters of rare earth minerals, and yet they have no rare earth minerals. So where are they getting said rare earth minerals? Congo. And so that's why they support that leader. There's also another group, the Allied Defense Forces, that's affiliated with ISIS, like the Islamic State. ISIS doesn't really exist as much anymore. ISIS was Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, but the Islamic State is an international terrorist organization that's really found a place in Africa and is wreaking havoc, particularly in Congo, Mozambique, which is a former Portuguese colony, on the east coast of Africa, near Tanzania, and in Mali. Mali is suffering a lot from Al-Qaeda. But this is all just to say that Congo has not been independent very long and suffered so much, and it doesn't get our attention because it's hard to understand, and it's far away. But that doesn't mean that we should forget about Congo, this history.